So tonight we have Dr. Kim Anderson with us, as well as her team. I'll let her introduce everybody. She is going to share some stuff about her perspectives on recovery study, as well as ask us for our feedback. So please feel free to unmute yourself, talk as needed. If you want to put stuff in the chat, I will be monitoring that and will read it if you put it in there. So feel free to unmute yourselves or put things in the chat. So thank you for being here tonight, Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, thanks, Megan, for letting us come back again. This is our third visit. It's, everyone that's been on the different meetings over the past couple of years has been really, really helpful in guiding our study. And we're researchers, but we don't know everything about spinal cord injury. I know a lot because I've been living with it for a long time, but it's important to have different perspectives. And so as we've been going through the research, you guys have been giving us feedback that helps us with our analysis and our interpretation. So we're going to share some updates on what you gave us feedback on last year. And then we have some new topics that we've been analyzing that we want to get your feedback on too. So please feel free to interrupt at any time. And I want to introduce, I see first on my screen, Sue Hinsey. Sue, say hi. She's one of our team members.
Hi.
And she's actually out in San Francisco right now, aren't you?
Seattle.
Oh, Seattle. Sorry,
yeah.
Seattle.
Yeah, that's all right.
And then I see Ann Bryden.
Hello. I think it was the bridge.
Ann's going to lead us in one of the end discussions, which is a very new topic as well. So you'll be hearing a lot more from her too. And then I saw Brian Grant there. Brian, yes. Brian Gran.
Hi, good evening. Good to see you guys. Thank you.
And I think Brian's actually in DC right now.
That's right.
We've been utilizing and capitalizing on virtual technology for this study as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and I think I'm going to keep it in this mode so I can see people as well. Can you guys see enough? Can you see my whole screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'll give just a little bit of a refresher, and then we'll get into sharing the results and getting your input. Okay. So this is a grant that we got funded by the Department of Defense. They have a pretty big spinal cord injury research program. And we are just getting into the beginning of the third year. So the whole goal of this grant is to understand perspectives on recovery and interventions to restore function, particularly across that first year of spinal cord injury. We know it's a very challenging year. So we get that input from people living with brand new spinal cord injuries, as well as people that they designate as their support person. And so then we have a very open, what we call qualitative methodology, where we can really discover what we don't know and hear straight from the people going through the experience. Now, if you're looking on a cell phone, this is probably a very small screen, and I apologize that. But what we're doing is, so we are interviewing 30 civilians with spinal cord injury and 15 and 15 veterans with spinal cord injury and 15 civilians with spinal cord injury. And each one of those designates a person that they want to be their support person going through this study. And so we do the first interview during inpatient rehab. Then we do the second interview around 6 months post-injury. And the final interview is around 12 months post-injury. So we get all of these interviews. We have a general guide, which that was the first thing that we got input on the group a couple of years ago. And we follow that guide. There's no right or wrong answers, just whatever people's experiences are, what their perspectives are. They tell us And it has really generated a huge amount of qualitative evidence. So what we've been trying to do is analyze the data that we've gotten so far based on these 4 main objectives. So one of them is, how do people define recovery, and how do people successfully define successful reintegration? So it's not how the medical community says recovery or success is, it's how people say whatever they feel is success. And we got your help last time on some of the categories that people were telling us about. So I'm going to share with you what we've been analyzing from everyone else since then. And then we're also looking at, how does family support and different factors like related to insurance or knowledge or gender, anything like that, might affect people's success at how they recover and get back into life, and also how they access interventions for their recovery. And then how do people overcome those barriers? And then lastly, what are people's decisions about trying to pursue different treatment options for their recovery? So it's a lot, and we're just really barely getting into the tip of the iceberg in the analysis of what we have. So any questions before I share with you some of the results? Okay, so these are the last time we asked for some input about what people was telling us are definitions of recovery. So what we do, for example, this table here, it shows each participant, and these are the civilians here. And you can see what their injury was when they were getting out of rehab. And this is their inpatient rehab definition of success at 6 months post-injury and at 12 months post-injury. So this particular individual said, when he was defining success, he said things that ended up in a category of employment, a category that was related to respiratory improvement, and a category that was related to mobility. So we had different phrases and stuff that we had gotten your input on, and these are some of the categories that you guys helped us. So we went through the rest of our data and we kept on categorizing what people were saying. So then, as an example, at 6 months injury, post-injury, this particular individual said motor functions were how he defined recovery. And then at 1 year post-injury, his definition of recovery involved time, kind of like being patient, being pragmatic, having mobility, and having things that he was still missing related to home and adaptation and activities. So in the next slide, I'm going to kind of show you how these different categories have been changing over time. But just for an update of where we are, we've got everybody enrolled on the civilian side, and we have 3 people left that still need to do their 6 month post-injury. Oh my gosh, someone's drawing. Okay. And then we've got about 6 or 7 people that we still need to do the final 12-month interview on. And then for our veterans side, we've been a little bit delayed related to COVID, but we've got 5 pairs enrolled out of the 15 so far for the veterans. Okay, now I'll read some of these terms for you, but the important thing here is you can see the red and the blue bars. In each of these graphs, the red is related to people with spinal cord injuries, and the blue is related to support persons. So for this particular graph here, these are the number of people that said one of these themes here was part of their definition of recovery. So, and this was at the inpatient rehab. So you can see for the people with spinal cord injuries, motor functions was their most frequent definition of recovery. And then that was followed by mobility, full recovery, and independence, and then positivity. If you look at the blue bars for the support people, positivity and motor functions were the most frequently identified definitions of recovery. And then things like independence and employment, and then other things that were less frequently mentioned. So that particular graph is everybody's data. Now this one over here is similar, but it's at 6 months post-injury. And remember, we're still missing 3 people that haven't got to that point yet. And so you can see there's differences a little bit so far in the themes that people use to define recovery, but there's, in this yellow box, there's some new themes that are coming up at 6 months. And so some of that, we have spasticity, time, pain reduction, the concept of progress, and then pragmatism and spirituality. Those are new things that were coming up at that time. And then over here, we only have 7 people analyzed so far for the 12 months post-injury. So where the frequencies here are certainly going to change once we get more people added. But there was one new definition that's emerged so far, and that was kind of a person's concept of complacency, basically dealing with where they were at that point in time. Any thoughts on what we're coming up with so far related to recovery definitions and how they change over time? Or anything in the chat, Megan, just let me know. Okay, I'm gonna go on because I wanna be able to get your input on the new things. Okay, so similarly, last time we also got your help on identifying reintegration themes. So like getting back into life and getting back into the community. And so this is a similar table. We have all the different participants that were civilians, and then the different themes and categories that they've identified across their year, how they define success, they're getting back into life. So the next slide shows a graph. I think it's easier to see how things change. So again, we have the themes for successfully getting back into life at the rehab time point. And here, the red for people with spinal cord injuries, the most frequent theme was being able to re-engage in social activities and social roles. And then employment was right after that. And then being able to be active and participate in different things. For the support persons, which is the blue bars, be active and participation was their most frequent theme. And then we have over here, home and adaptations, social activities, and emotional concepts related to successfully getting back into life, positivity, and travel. So the support people have a few different definitions of recovery than the people with spinal cord injuries. And so we haven't gotten into what that might mean yet, but you can easily think people, support persons have a little bit of a different role, and they have obviously a different experience. Then at 6 months, you can see we've got definitions, their frequencies are changing a little bit. For people with spinal cord injuries, employment is seeming to remain pretty high in their definition of getting back into life. And there's a couple new themes at 6 months with support persons, which were related to respiratory and sensory functions. And then over here at 12 months, one new theme came up at 12 months by an individual with spinal cord injury, which we named as full reintegration. It's basically this individual wanted to get back to doing 100% of what they were doing pre-injury, which is kind of similar to another theme you helped us identify for recovery, which was full recovery. The same concept there. So we'll keep populating these, and then we'll start to look at different factors on top of that that might be influencing these kinds of definitions.
In the chat, somebody said that for employment, it depends on the age of the person.
Yep, we will be able, we have people's age, we have their gender, their race, and other things like that that we'll be able to lay over on top of the data that we're seeing. And definitely there are a lot of things that impact employment and also barriers to getting back into employment as well. So thank you for bringing up that comment. That's very important. Also, the age at which you're injured influences your decisions about employment too. Okay, so now we're barely at the very beginning of our analysis of people's experiences as they're trying to seek recovery. So we've started to identify some sources where people are getting information, some options that they're telling us about, and then briefly about their interest in clinical trials as a means of one way to improve recovery. So what we've identified so far here are some of the sources this is pretty much all the sources so far that people have told us about where they are thinking of or looking at for information about recovery. And so I'd like you guys to think about these categories and let me know, like, do they make sense, or there's some things that you think are missing as you've been living with spinal cord injury for longer periods of time. So obviously when people are in inpatient rehab, their inpatient team's a big source of information. Family and friends, online sources, traditional media like the TV or newspapers or magazines. Outside healthcare providers, this is a category that is people that are not the inpatient team. Some people stay connected to their inpatient team, and then other people have other outside healthcare providers. So we wanted to differentiate between those two. The research team, other people with spinal cord injuries, and then there's some people that say they don't have any sources of information. I'll show you on the next slide some graphs so you can see where we are so far. But these are the sources. Does anyone have any comments about this or other sources that they actually go to get information about recovery options? Now also with the recording, if other people go back and watch this, our contact information is at the end, so people can email us additional comments too. And also if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, you can always just email us comments. So some of the options that we've heard about so far for recovery are outpatient therapy, different kinds of technology, doing exercises at home or at a community gym. Some people go to skilled nursing facilities, psychological health options, because psychology is part of recovery. Experimental interventions, this would be related to research things or clinical trials, various medical interventions, complementary health, or some people also say they don't know about any options. So this is where we are so far. I'm gonna go ahead and show you the next slide. You can see the colors even if you can't see the text. So this is related to the recovery sources. So like the inpatient team here, that's in purple. And this is sources that are identified during inpatient rehab. So it kind of makes sense that people are really relying on the inpatient team for recovery information. And the PWS is persons with spinal cord injury, and the SP is support persons again. Also, it's pretty, it's kind of disturbing that there's a pretty significant number of people here in the red that weren't able to identify any sources for recovery. So that's an area that we need to investigate more and what we can do to help people at that time period for when they're going to be getting out of rehab, what types of options are available to them. And then, okay, so this is at 6 months. So you can see there's a little bit of a decrease in the purple, which was the inpatient team. There's an increase in the orange, which is outside healthcare providers. And there's an increase in the blue, which is family and friends. And the light blue is online sources. And we still have a few more people we need to add to this. And then this is where we are at the 12 months, but remember, we need to add basically half of the rest of our participants once they go through this. And we have a little bit of people that are in the family, identified family and friend sources. This turquoise here is online. The yellow is the research team. Orange is healthcare providers, and red is no sources. Any general thoughts on these patterns, at least like from inpatient to 6 months? Is anyone surprised by this, or is this what people would think people's sources of recovery information might be?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just gonna say, I mean, it makes sense that the inpatient team would kind of go down, and more like the outside research, outside the healthcare providers would go up as like
Mhm.
the time goes on. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think that it's important for people to stay connected to the inpatient team for longer periods of time?
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. I mean, yeah, I'm still kind of connected with my team even 5 years later. So
You are, yeah. Mhm. Especially if the inpatient team had spinal cord injury expertise.
Mhm.
Okay.
Doctor, I have a question.
Yeah.
What about the economic aspects of all of this? This is Don.
I don't.
What about the economic aspects of this? For instance, those who do not have the internet, for those who do not have the correct devices in order to research this, and or the support for such as that.
Yes.
Would that have been looked at as something that may have affected some of the outcomes?
Yes, it will be looked at because we haven't got to that analysis yet. But we do find out whether or not people, have access to the internet, or if that's a place that they tend to go to or not for information. And also a big thing that we're looking at it as we're coding the interviews, but we haven't gotten to the big depth of the analysis of it yet, is insurance. I mean, we know that insurance impacts people's access to therapy, and it can impact their access to different technology and things like that.
Sure.
So what we're trying to do is understand people's experiences with insurance in those situations, so we can uncover what the barriers are and how do we make it a smoother process for people in the future. Is there anything that we can do to try to eliminate some of those barriers that people experience financially? Yeah. Sue, you're starting to dig a little bit into the insurance data. Did you want to say anything? Sue, are you still here with us? She may have had to step away. Okay. Any other comments on the sources?
Just a comment saying that the people saying none, that there's no sources available is just shocking.
It is. I was shocked at the number of people that said this. And so that's definitely something we have to dig into and come up with a solution for. Okay. And then this is a representation of the different recovery options. And this is at inpatient rehab. So pink, we have outpatient therapy. So that's probably not surprising that people are identifying that when they're getting ready to be discharged. And then another frequent one, blue, support persons were thinking a lot about skilled nursing facilities. And that was usually related to if the support person had to identify a skilled nursing facility for their loved one to be discharged to. And that was usually a pretty difficult situation. And then green here is technology. And then here in gray, which is also shocking a little bit, the number of people that had not identified any sources or any options for recovery at that point in time, aside from being in inpatient rehab. And then this is the 6-month picture. So there's still some people that are doing or have access to outpatient therapy at that point, but then there was an increase. Yellow here is home exercises and activities that people start doing. And green is technology, so that's still pretty frequent. And then blue, you start to see this, or turquoise blue, an increase in people thinking about experimental or research options. In this peach color right down here that comes up, more people start thinking or hearing about different medical interventions. So it might be like a surgical intervention or a medication that might help them or something like that. And then again, at 12 months, we're still waiting for the rest of our data here. So any thoughts about those patterns? Okay, I'm going to scoot forward and so we can get to Anne. And this is just our initial look at clinical trials during inpatient rehab. We have in blue here, you can see the number of people saying that they have some kind of interest in clinical trials, but there was about a third that said they were not interested in clinical trials at all, and then some that were maybe. And at the 6-month post-injury, there seems to be a decrease in people that are not interested in clinical trials. They're either shifting their opinion over to maybe or over to yes. And I have a couple quotes on the next one so you can see what people are saying related to the yes, no, or maybe category. So this example is a person that said, yes, they're interested in clinical trials. This is a support person. And the gist of what they're saying is that if it's going to be better for him in the long run, and it looks like it's got good substantiated facts behind it, whatever the study is, then they'll make the decision about whether or not they would want to go through with it. Whereas this person in the middle was not interested in clinical trials at all. And it was a person with spinal cord injury. And he clearly understands exactly clinical trial. It's an experiment. That's what it is. And you don't know whether or not it's going to work. And depending on the design of the study, you don't know exactly what you're going to get. And that made him feel uncomfortable with the unknown. And so that was why he was not interested in clinical trials. And then you can see here a person that said maybe they wanted to see, the gist of what they were saying is they wanted to basically see how their natural recovery was occurring, how their therapy helped, if they had to think about surgery, how that helped. And then once they got all of that back, they would see if they were interested in an experimental situation. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments about clinical trials? This is just the beginning of the analysis, but any thoughts about maybe what else we should look for when we're thinking about clinical trials?
I have a question that I would like to pose to the group too, is, occasionally we come across people who need some clarification about what a clinical trial is. So I'm wondering if any of you might want to share your experiences from when you were first injured, depending on when that was, whether or not that was something that was ever even explained to you or known to you. Just my curiosity, really.
So I'll share that I don't remember anybody talking to me about clinical trials at all. It was something that wasn't on my radar, kind of still isn't on my radar, but yeah, it was never something that I thought of, and I don't think anybody ever brought it up to me.
Thanks.
Do you wish that they would have, just as explaining like what it is? You can be perfectly
I
honest.
mean, I don't think it would have made a difference in whether or not I chose to engage in anything, but I mean, I always like to know what's going on and what's available.
Mhm.
I'd like to add a little bit more to the comment regarding clinical trials. I think the issue is some people with spinal cord injuries have problems finding clinical trials, especially for me. Whenever I go to my doctor's appointments, I'm always the one. I have to be my own advocate, ask people what's the latest news. Do you have any research available for me? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And usually I always search clinicaltrials.gov. And it took me a while to understand it, but especially for people newly injured, it can be kind of difficult for them to understand that website. So I think probably making it easier, like accessing those kind of, especially clinicaltrial.gov, it can be a hard website to understand if you're new to the whole spinal cord injury club. But yeah, I just wish there'd be more information regarding clinical trials, because I know some doctors are very conservative and don't really like to share that much of what's going on.
Right.
It's just-
There is a new website that is easier to understand than clinicaltrials.gov, and it's specific to spinal cord injury. And maybe Megan, you could put that in the chat box. It's scitrials.org. And it's about a year or so old. But that's really great feedback to hear that you pretty much have to be your advocate and ask your doctor about information about clinical trials.
And Maurice put in the chat that he wishes he would have had the knowledge about clinical trials.
Okay.
Yes, like right now for me, I'm participating in the transcutaneous spinal cord injury stimulation. And the only reason I got enrolled into it because I kept on bugging the researchers. I would email them every day, are you still recruiting? When are you starting? Constantly, until they finally got back to me and told me, yeah, we're recruiting it. Dr. Screen used to it's kind of hard sometimes when you send an email and then they don't get back to you, and you kind of
Yes.
lose interest, or it kind of lets you down, like, man, maybe they're not interested in me, or something. But that's another thing, like when you have to be persistent, and it's like I said, you gotta be an advocate and look out for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been good, important for us to share with people early on, kind of so that they know to be as active as they can in pursuing information. But I agree, being persistent is incredibly important. Okay, so now Anne is going to take over and I'll just operate the slides for her.
Thanks.
And Anne, you tell me what you want me to do.
Okay, I'll just, when it's relevant, I'll say next slide. So thank you. Okay, so I guess just one final comment on the research and clinical trials. As an OT and also as a researcher, it's really hard to keep track of everything that's out there. So I always rely on the folks that come in and that I work with, because they're always sharing things that they've gone out and kind of advocated on their own to try to find out about. So that's really helpful too. So anything that you know that you can share with your clinicians can be helpful as well. But so I have about 4 or 5 slides here, so I don't have fancy graphs yet, but we are just at the beginning of analyzing data related to greatest concerns. So we have a question that we ask at every stage of the interviews. So, early on, and then in the middle, and then at the end, what people's greatest concerns are. So this is just kind of a tip of the iceberg sort of analysis of what we've found with those questions. So today, what I'll be sharing with you, next slide, please, is looking at the themes that are starting to emerge as we look at people's answers to those questions. So I'm going to go through the information that we have gotten from people during the first interview. So the interviews that we do with them during the rehabilitation stay. And what you're looking at here are some of the themes that emerged from the persons with spinal cord injury, and just really looking at the civilians at this point, since we have full data from this group. But I guess unsurprisingly, one of the greatest concerns for folks revolved around physical recovery. So mostly, what will come back as far as function, and how much function will recover, and also a lack of progress. So people were quite concerned about, when is that going to happen? When are they going to see that plateau? We had one participant talk about how plateau is just a terrible word to use. And so he was very, very bothered by that term. Another strong theme obviously had to do with leaving rehabilitation. So we're talking with people during the rehab process. They're in this, world where they're learning how to deal with and manage their injury, but there's a lot of uncertainty about what happens in the next steps. And a lot of it is mostly concerned in our group from the folks who are being discharged to a skilled nursing facility. So that's what SNF is, a skilled nursing facility, if you're not aware. But also there were some concerns about how things would happen at home. So what would happen in the home environment when they leave the safe care facility, and then they're at home, and either they're learning to manage their care, or they might have family members who are having to help, or having aides come in. Another big area that came up was psychological concerns. So the psychological concerns had to do with, recovery, kind of getting my head right, as one participant put it, but also psychological stressors. So one person described it as just being in a constant state of worry. There are so many uncertain things in the future that, all that person could really do is just lay there and worry. Then naturally, the next categories involved employment, concerns about financial stability, whether or not they would be able to get access to sufficient therapy once they were in their home or skilled nursing facility environments. We had a few folks, one person who said no concerns, one person who had a concern of how they were going to manage their pain, And then one person, because our study really has been kind of under the umbrella of COVID this whole time, had a fear and concern about getting COVID once he was in the community. So I guess looking at these, I have another slide that I'd like your input on some specific things. But before we get to that, are there any things on this slide that anybody feels maybe surprised about, or is there something obviously missing in your mind?
I don't know. For me, I was kind of surprised that only one person said pain, because that's like the major thing I'm still dealing with 5 years later. Is I'm always in pain. Like from the neurological, the nerve pain.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually a really important point. And I wonder if when we have a chance to look at our 6-month data and 12-month data, we're going to have maybe more of an emphasis on people dealing with pain. So it's a great point. Thank you. And I'm sorry to hear that you're still dealing with that. Are there any other?
And that actually exemplifies the inpatient rehab interviews on average were done about 6 weeks post-injury. So that would be fast. And then people are getting discharged. And a lot of times it takes pain a little bit longer to start manifesting, especially if it turns out to be neuropathic pain. So
I'm noticing that in your screen, I don't see the word independence anywhere. So does that mean that it culminates to that as far as leaving rehab and discharge? I would always think the one goal and focus should always be on independence.
I would say that's probably, and we'll take a deeper look at that. I'm pretty sure it's embedded in the idea of recovery, particularly the physical recovery. And I think at this stage, maybe people are still learning so much that they haven't kind of pulled that recovery, the idea of recovery fully through to independence. It does come up a little bit though, when people talk about how they're going to be able to do things once they're at home.
Well, it's the definition of independence as far as bowel and bladder, and as far as transferring, and as far as propelling. That's the focus I would generate.
Yep. You know, I think we'll definitely be on the lookout. And one of the things we can do with the software that we use for this is do searches and combine codes. So that feedback is really helpful, because that'll help us with, you know, what perspective should we really be looking at these themes in.
Sure.
So we may end up with the theme being independence.
And I was kind of wondering where bowel and bladder was, if it was just kind of in the physical recovery, or if it's something that you start worrying about six months, a year post-injury.
I would think that you'd want to worry about that 5 minutes after.
Yeah.
Well, and I think also these, we didn't say, tell us what is your number one greatest concern. So people sort of expressed what sort of floated to the front of their mind at the time. Some people might have mentioned 4 things. One, you know, just really a few might focus on one thing. But I would tend to think that maybe the bowel and bladder might come later, but depending on when
that would be your number. That would be number 1 or number 2, right? That's a joke.
I know, I got that. I like that.
Okay.
Good one. I'm going to use that.
Focus. A different focus.
A different focus. And I think people are just still blindsided. You're in rehab such a short time these days that so we'll be really interested to share the 6 and 12-month data with you all soon. I don't know how soon. It's a lot to go through. So I think next slide would be great, so we can kind of let you guys go. But so we had a few things kind of surface up that had to do with direct personal care. And it wasn't for this particular person, she mentioned her concern was the strain on her husband, right? He had so many other things to do. She couldn't imagine him dealing with a trach and some of the other things. I have that sort of under the category of direct personal care. But I'm also wondering if it fits under a theme maybe more related to caregiver strain. Because she's really not even worrying about doing her own direct personal care at this point. So I'll just let you think about that for a minute. Or maybe there's something else too that is more relevant, a theme that we're not thinking about. We have some things related to where people are going to live. So home accessibility is obviously a big factor. So, you know, people are concerned with getting home, making sure everything's going to work. And, you know, that was that person's greatest concern, or being able to find an affordable apartment that is accessible. And we've had this last quote here from somebody who didn't have a place to go to. So returning to the place they were was not an option. And I think a lot of it had more to do with finances and some other situations. But I wonder if for now, if we should link these ideas of housing and security with home accessibility, and then dig deeper into the resources around, you know, each person, which would obviously lead them to wherever, whatever they're able to find as far as someplace accessible. Does anybody have thoughts on any of these? If you think of something, obviously, as Kim mentioned, you do have our information, so you can go ahead and email her. But you know, accessibility is obviously a huge thing, and a lot of people are in turmoil trying to figure that out in the short time that they're in rehab. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, sorry. So now we're looking at the responses of the support persons. So we asked the same question: what are your greatest concerns? And again, this is during the rehabilitation process, and it's the civilians only, not veterans or support persons of veterans. And so home accessibility seemed to be the thing that came up a lot for this group. And I think it's obviously because family members and support persons are kind of trying to manage getting things ready on the home front or make arrangements for discharge plans. But there were quite a few that voiced psychological concerns. They had more to do with the state of the person, right? How are they going to manage, you know, living in this, you know, different reality? And, you know, the support persons in particular felt that it was important to provide psychological support, mostly in the terms of encouraging positivity. And there were quite a few psychological stressors that were also mentioned from the support persons as well. So an example would be, you know, someone said this whole situation is kind of a scary new situation for the whole family. And, you know, another person was very concerned with the circumstances of her loved one's injury and kind of wanted, you know, the injury was caused by another person, and she was interested in wanting, I guess, retribution in a way. So there's kind of a lot to unpack there. Physical recovery came up, not as much as with the persons with spinal cord injury, but the concern was what would happen when there was a lack of progression, a lack of physical recovery. Therapy, access to sufficient therapy, especially by people who know spinal cord injury therapy, was important. And then discharge uncertainty: what skilled facility would someone be going to? Transportation: how are they going to get around in their communities if they don't have accessible transportation? And in some cases, still medical concerns when the person returns home. So I guess I have the same question. I know we're kind of getting tight on time. So if anyone has something really quick that they want to say, please do. What I'll do instead is I'll go to the next slide, which is another one where some things I'd like you to kind of think about concerning other themes that emerged, again, with the support persons while their loved one was in acute inpatient rehab. So some of these, single comments, we're still trying to figure out, do they belong in other categories, right? How do we make sense of how this all works together? So one thing that came up was concern of a support person about her son or her loved one adapting to a skilled nursing facility. So having to be there, the stigma involved in being a young person in a skilled facility. Another person brought up the idea of that person feeling like they're a burden because their abilities are different now and they need assistance. And then physical inactivity. This was kind of a specific comment about somebody who, had a health condition that might kind of take over if that person's not, if that person's physically inactive. Safety at home, having a fall and getting, a worse injury. Here's where independence came in some way, Don. So independence in IADL. And so what in the heck is that, right? IADL is instrumental activities of daily living. So the things that aren't so much related to your direct personal care, but things like managing your banking, making your meals, managing your own appointments, those sorts of things. So the support person had a concern about that. Another person was concerned about being able to do the direct personal care. Like, am I going to be able to do the slide board transfers at home in the shower to help this, my loved one?
I think one of the things we need to do is eliminate acronyms. I don't know what any of those things are.
I apologize. For which one? The IADL I explained?
That's okay. I'll learn them.
Instrumental activities of daily living. So
There you go. All right.
All the stuff you need to do to make your life kind of happen. And the PWS is still your person with spinal cord.
Very good.
Yeah, we'll minimize the alphabet soup next time. Thank you. And then the last one, no concern. This is this person felt they had no concerns for their loved one because they were just going to process the knowledge provided and learn what to do and apply it and go from there. So they felt pretty confident that even if they didn't know what to do, they'd be able to use the knowledge and figure it out. So there's a lot here. If anything comes to mind right now, I think be happy to hear your thoughts, but if you want to follow up with us later, or any of you who are listening to this recording, we'd really love your take on some of these. And if you have new ideas for themes, did we miss anything, right?
Yeah, so we're really looking for your input. Are the names that were coming up for different categories, are they reflective of what people are telling us? So if you have any suggestions about different phraseology, that's great.
Yeah, and especially like the adapting to the skilled facility, does that belong under the category of discharge uncertainty that we've already talked about? Or, safety at home, does that go in the home accessibility category? So I think these are things when we look more and more at the data and see the patterns, we'll be able to make decisions. And I think maybe even for the last one, rather than no concerns, is that actually resilience? Is that a theme that's emerging? Because it seems like that's an important factor. And so I guess just to wrap up, sorry, Kim, if you, just to know the next steps, we're going to be comparing the concerns again across the first year. As I mentioned, we're going to take a look at the veteran data and look at comparisons between the experiences of veterans and civilians. And also we're going to do lots of analyzing where we combine with the other codes and themes that we've been assigning to the content that that we get from the recorded interviews. And that's that.
All right. I have things going on in the background here.
Oh,
Can everyone see our contact information here? And Megan, you feel free to put my email in the newsletter with the recording once you send that back out.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything final that they would like to say?
I
Okay.
just want to say thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to share the information with you. And maybe once you digest it for a little bit, think about it and your past experiences, we really want your input and any kinds of suggestions or things for us to think about. Very, very welcomed.
And we will attach the contact info to the email on YouTube. We'll put it in the description. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.